I'm Sam Baker, CEO and co-founder of The Pool, and I'm here in this amazing room in Mayfair with Project Literacy Ambassador Lily Cole. Lily's an actress, an activist, an entrepreneur. She launched her own business, theimpossible.com, in 2013, and she's here today as an ambassador for Project Literacy Lab. Lily, welcome.
Thank you.
So just tell me a bit about Project Literacy Lab, what it does and what its ultimate goals are.
I'll first say Project Literacy is a coalition of different organisations. I helped launch it a year and a half ago, looking at the issue of illiteracy and how we can tackle it. And the first year, I think, was very much in terms of my role, an awareness raising exercise. And then what I really love about Project Literacy Lab is it's taking that kind of thesis into action, and specifically looking at the business sector and how can we accelerate and help grow startups that are creating products and services that will help impact on illiteracy rates. The Project Literacy Lab has 16 different companies right now that it's working with. It's a 5-year program, and those companies get mentorship over the 5 years from people in kind of senior positions at Pearson's, and also other people from different companies and sectors to help them grow and scale their businesses.
Talk to me about the scale of illiteracy in the UK and beyond.
Well, in the UK, they reckon 1 in 5 children leave school with low literacy levels, and then globally there are 758 million people, adults, who are illiterate. So it's a significant kind of, in terms of scale, problem at home and abroad. And I think the thing that really struck me with Project Literacy, and the reason I got involved, was that the kind of far-reaching impact that has, that it's not as simple as not being able to read a nice book or even write a CV, but it actually has the statistics to show a direct relationship to the levels of crime, kind of the number of people who go to jail, rates of AIDS, child malnutrition, and there's a statistical relationship between many of those social issues and illiteracy. So really what we're looking at is literacy as a kind of key to trying to address bigger social issues globally.
Because your profile, you must get approached by so many causes. What was it about this one that made you think, yes, I'm going to really get behind it and support it?
I try and, at least in recent years, try and look at more like kind of causal problems. So not necessarily the symptoms that you see that can be more maybe obviously affecting and kind of heartfelt, but trying to understand what are the deep root causes behind those symptoms, whether that's looking at capitalism and the impact of business, or whether that's looking at something like literacy, which is, I would say, a kind of causal problem that then manifests in many other issues. Because I think if you're trying to address problems in the world, you have to look at the root causes, otherwise you're going to constantly be band-aiding the symptoms.
Would you say that illiteracy is a bigger problem for women?
Certainly, yes. Of the 758 million adults who are illiterate, 2/3 of them are women. So there's immediately there a gender bias in it. And then the implications of that doesn't help us in our kind of path towards real gender equality on the planet. And again, the statistics to show that if a woman is literate, she's less likely to get married as a child, she's less likely to have a malnourished child, they've shown that doubling female literacy rates reduces infant mortality by 30%, which is pretty shocking. Of course, she's more likely to get employment and kind of empowerment. So the implications of that are many and manifold. In some areas of Africa, 80% of women who have female genital mutilation are illiterate. So again, you get these kind of really quite profound connection where if you want to end Fgm, literacy seems to be one of the important components to doing that.
It seems to me, just not being as au fait with the subject as you are, that it's all about the fact that reading and writing gives you the power to get economic and social independence, or just independence of thought.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's about giving people the tools so that they can improve their own lives, they can improve their own families' lives, and also just something like if you're illiterate, you're 5 times more likely to contract AIDS. I mean, that's most likely because because you're not what's the barrier to what's the cause for contracting AIDS in many circumstances? It's lack of awareness and understanding about what is why you would contract AIDS and how you contract AIDS. And so if you don't have an education, and literacy is a good kind of barometer of how educated you are, it's much more likely that you won't have that tool in your knowledge, basically, in your power.
Yeah, because I was really surprised about the Fgm statistic. Well, not really surprised, I just wondered about it because I know someone who's had FGM, she's extremely literate and her parents were extremely literate, and I just wondered how much of it was to do with the literacy and how much of it is to do more to do with culture. I don't know.
So, I mean, every statistic has to be taken in its context, right? So of course there's going to be other variables that affect it. And I'm not an expert on FGM, but for me, I think it's not, we're not saying that, and I don't think Project Literary is trying to say that if everyone on the planet was literate, we wouldn't have these problems. Like, it's not the only solution and the singular solution, but I think is an important part of the solution. There's a charity that I've worked with in the past who look specifically at FGM in Kenya, and the great, amazing charity called SAFE, and they do theatre. Originally they started doing it for AIDS prevention and teaching people how to use condoms and how you get AIDS, and through comedy actually in theatre, educating people in slums. And then they've more recently started using a similar process to educate around FGM, and they've managed to have a significant impact because as far as I understand from what they say, FGM is a kind of cultural attitude and issue, but if you give kind of the alternative options and alternative knowledge and alternative resources to communities, then they have the option to think differently and they have the option to elect out of it. And I think literacy represents part of that process of giving you another option. You know, if you're able to read online, you know, about some of the mythology around something like FGM, for example, and alternative possibilities, and maybe the kind of actual medical consequences, then you're able to make that choice, and you might make a different choice.
Okay, so one of the businesses here today is called AfriPads, and their reason for existing really is to supply sanitary protection to girls in Africa so that they don't have to miss school because of not having it. It's when you start to think about those issues, you know, all the issues that affect girls and women that don't affect men. What else do you think, what are the other businesses that you think have had an important impact?
AfriPads, I haven't met the founder yet, but I don't know that literacy was her primary motivation for doing it, but it's definitely a significant consequence. As you said, 1 in 10 girls drop out of school because they don't have the right menstrual product, so if you can give them a much cheaper alternative, that's going to have a knock-on effect in school attendance. The other businesses I've been very impressed by, I was really impressed by the company that are providing education tablets to prisons in the US.
Yes.
I'd read previously last year that 70% of inmates in the US are illiterate. So in a way, it's not to justify any kind of, you know, crimes, but you have to see that people are more likely to commit crimes and more likely to end up in prison if they are put in a disadvantaged position in the first place, i.e. they're illiterate and haven't had a sufficient education growing up. And then the chance of them reoffending is much higher if they continue to be illiterate. So there's an amazing opportunity there to take the time that they're in prison, to give them the education so that they're less likely to reoffend. And he said that re-offences go down 43% when they're given the tool of education in prison, which is pretty astounding.
It seems like quite a simple solution, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you think about it.
I mean, they're all quite simple, but I guess it's the multifaceted nature of them, right? Because in the 16 companies that we're looking at, you've got everything as diverse as that tablet to sanitary pads for, you know, reusable sanitary pads for women in Africa, to different kind of online learning solutions. So it does require, I think, a very multifaceted and kind of out-of-the-box way of thinking about the problem.
Do you think literacy is a feminist issue?
Yes, actually, because it affects women more than it affects men, so inherently that makes it part of a feminist agenda. So many problems are feminist issues, so it's not singular in that way, but it's, I think certainly if you're driving as a feminist towards real equality, then literacy needs to be an important component of that.
So you've launched your own business 4 years ago now, impossible.com. You're in startup hell, we're in startup hell. It's been really interesting to me to watch obviously the entrepreneurs that we're talking to today are very much focused on mainly focused on the developing world and mainly education or education related. But the focus on them of the greater good when you're trying to build a business and you have to raise money, that balance is quite difficult, isn't it? How have you balanced that in your business?
It was the only reason that I started the business was for kind of social impact, because I'd done a lot of work with different charities, and I just I went through just a process of thinking actually businesses have such a significant impact on the planet. I was working with businesses as a model or as as an advocate, and at the same time working with charities, and I just felt like there was such a disconnect there that businesses are so powerful much of the time and have such an enormous impact that they shouldn't be divorced from actually building solutions, and that if we could weave those things together and we could actually kind of support and build businesses that solve problems in a sustainable way, then we would actually have less, ironically, need for charity. So I found it impossible with a specific idea in mind, but now it's grown more into an ecosystem that still has that mission of trying to think about how we can use technology and design products to solve problems. And it's been very interesting the last, I guess, 5 years working in that space to see the growth, really. And even from a kind of investment side, there is now, I think, so much more opportunity for impact investments. You've got very big funds and big players in the investment spectrum looking at the impact space, not just because they want to, have a kind of positive impact in their life, but also I think because it's financially viable and they see that the curve is going in that direction as consumers more and more want to support companies that we feel are doing something positive in the planet and not just something awful. So I'm very optimistic about the direction that business is going with when you look at it through that lens.
Your other passion in your life is acting.
Yeah.
And you're in the Philanthropist at the moment in the West End. How do you balance those two quite big, all-consuming concerns?
I mean, I've always a workaholic is the short answer, and I always have been. I guess I waxes and wanes. I've got these two different things that I care about. One is the kind of social political side, and one is my capacity to feel creative and kind of creatively challenged and growing. And it waxes and wanes how much I'm putting my energy in one over the other. But for me, it feels important to find a balance, because it's just my soul would be hungry for art if I wasn't doing anything artistic. And at the same time, there are so many important issues in the planet that we need to address and think about. So if I feel I can add any value or help, I feel compelled to. So I don't know, it just kind of happens.